Washington ends the season on a high note with a dominant win over Boise State.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Toamshoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes with me over at Huskies Wire. Thanks for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. If you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. Just a quick reminder for all you everydayers out there, wherever you're getting this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, wherever that might be, please make sure to click that subscribe button, click that little bell as well, so you never miss when we go live just like this. And if you're on the audio only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help the show out a lot. Now, Lars, we got a whole lot that we need to get to because Washington has a very bright future ahead. This game showed that. But will Jedd Fisch be part of it? We're going to talk about that later on, so stick around for that because we need to talk about this game first. Washington's defense was absolutely tremendous throughout this contest, as was the offense. And when I look at this game, it really was just a perfect encapsulation of the season for better and for worse because you play a Mountain West team, you beat them senseless. That's probably the best way to say this. But it's also just unfortunate that we didn't see this kind of talent shine through in bigger games this year.
Yeah, I mean, you get a game away from Husky Stadium where you just eviscerate an opponent completely from start to finish. And it's as you should.
I would say start to finish.
Well, again, but when you look back at it, it feels like that. Whereas then, to your point, exactly, yeah, it was not. That second quarter really, you did need to have that big momentum swing to make that happen. But even still, you feel so much better coming out of this game, looking forward into next season. We'll talk about the rest later. Just what you saw tonight, where Dezmen matched, 4 touchdowns from his bowl game as a freshman against Louisville, but was better, was sharper, didn't have any interceptions. It just looked like a little next step up. Dezmen Williams, Jonah Coleman gets the rushing touchdown. Everything was there. Denzel has his big day. Like everything was working once it finally started to click in the second quarter. And shout out to the duo of freshmen that also got their first. Raiden gets his first touchdown catch. Dezmen also gets another one. Freshman record, I think we're going to call it now. I hate when you call it bowl games, throw it in there. It was a 13th game, but it is true. There's so much potential on this team, and that's why when we talked about before the season, 9-3 was real. You should be 10-3 right now. But, you got to live with what happened in Wisconsin.
No, absolutely. And that's such a big part of this because you look at it, again, from start to finish, especially if we want to stay on the offensive side of the ball before we get to the defense a little bit later on. This was just such a really nice showing of what this season was in so many different ways because Jonah Coleman obviously still wasn't 100%, but we saw a better version of him than we've seen in a very long time, which is very nice to see. And Denzel also very clearly wasn't 100% with when he had to come out of the game and looked like he was still clearly in a lot of pain, but he still winds up with 6 catches for 125 yards and a touchdown. I don't know what happened on that play. The safety just decided not to cover him, which, hard-hitting analysis seems like a bad idea. I'm just going to throw that out there. It was nice to see Quentin Moore get involved, get him a touchdown in the last game of his career. And then we look at this offensive line as well. I don't think it was necessarily perfect today, but I also think that Boise State had a really nice game plan for how to contain Dezmen Williams. And if there's one thing that team has been known for, especially under Spencer Danielson, it's been playing a really nice disciplined defense, and they were able to contain Dezmen in the pocket. He held onto the ball. He made a couple of mistakes at different points in time, but he also just looked like exactly what we've expected from him all season long. He was efficient. He threw the ball really, really well all over the field. He still missed a couple of throws that I'm sure he'd like to have back. But when you look at his performance as a whole, it was everything is on the up and up. Everything looks like it's headed in the right direction.
It is, and you didn't need the Rutgers miracle of the 400, 100-yard game. You didn't need a massive comeback like you had at Maryland. And again, like you led the show with, you shouldn't have that against a Mountain West opponent. But there's a lot of things that we've seen this season that could suggest, like I thought coming into this game, it was going to be a little closer of a final score. I had it 38-28 in that kind of ballpark where got the 38 right. But, that's where you look at it and think they should be this, but it ends up being that. And tonight it wasn't the case of that. It was more so, why can't this team show up every single time they go on the road? Or at least 85% of this team, let's just say, because you're never going to get it every single game. But with what Jedd Fisch has at his disposal, 30 points at minimum should have been the bar of the season. And so, you look at it and think, Damon, could he still have been better? He will. He'll be better, I'm sure. But it didn't need to have that massive, second half that really was required. It felt like throughout much of the Big Ten conference season. But again, it's a reminder, you're playing a Mountain West team who worth noting was Mountain West champion. So you're not facing, the lowest of the low in the Mountain West, where that's, kind of those basketball play-in games, as it were. You're playing a really sound defensive team, like you mentioned. And so to get 38 points, that's really significant when you look at it in the grand scheme of things.
So I certainly agree with that. I look at everything that this team has brought to the table all season long. And you talk about not necessarily being able to get over the hump. I think that was such a big part of it, because that's why when you said, from start to finish, I disagreed, because we didn't see that in the first quarter. And that has been just such a big thing, not even just on the road this season. We saw that at home through the back portion of the season, especially as we got into Big Ten play, which was really, really frustrating. And as this team has continued to just grow and get better and mature, it's nice to see them start to get over those sorts of humps. But that's one of those things where you stall out in the red zone on that very first drive. And then your next two drives, I think go for a total of -1 yard. After the first drive where you get the field goal. So there were still certainly things that you can improve on and get better at. And it's one of those things where I don't want to say the defense bailed Washington out in this game, because that's unfair, and that certainly isn't the case. But it's just also one of those things where, as you look at what this team needs to do, I think maturity is going to go a long way in that ballpark. And you just look at all of the guys that you have coming back next year, where you mentioned Dezmen, Roebuck, and Raiden Weisbreit. You look at these running backs in Adam Muhammad, who wasn't necessarily featured very heavily tonight, but Jordan Washington looked absolutely awesome. This offensive line, where you think about guys like Paki Finau and Champ Talialia, without mentioning John Mills too, who's been a freshman All-American at this point in time. Like, there's so many really nice pieces all over this offense to come back. And as these guys continue to grow and gel and learn together, you can't help but think that the ceiling is so much higher going into 2026.
And where does that start with? Jedd Fisch. And I'm glad you said maturing, because, Jedd Fisch is a mature guy. He's an adult in the room. But there's sometimes where Jedd gets a little bit in his own way. And I don't think we saw that as much tonight, right? I didn't feel that sense of Jedd out-trying himself, or, trying to do too much. Where, like Spencer Danielson had a good plan in the first quarter. So did Colorado State. And then look what happened the rest of that game. That kind of was what it felt like, but even a better version of that tonight, where Jedd didn't let the first quarter bleed into the second quarter. You hit the 70-plus yardage to Denzel, and then Dezmen and Raiden, followed up with that. But it's just about, okay, you're going to face good teams and good coaches. Can you counter the counter? Can you get through that first initial wave? Because at times they've gotten bogged down, and tonight was really kind of a testament to Jedd to say, you know what? We're just going to keep to our plan. We're going to stay within ourselves. We're the better team in this equation. We're not going to let, the Wisconsin game creep up of, oh, hey, it's, 10-3 at half, or, 13,
Sure,
whatever, 13-7 at half, whatever you want to put that score as. Once you had that kind of first seal break, then the floodgates just open. And I think, to use the water analogy, now the fish can run free and swim free. And so that really was what it felt like. You're just going downstream at that point, and everything is just kind of going in your favor. And there's no reason why it shouldn't.
Right. And that's one of the things that, when everything was going right this season, we saw that against Purdue and Illinois and some of these teams that aren't in the, the upper echelon of the conference at this point in time. Illinois was certainly the closest to that, but still it's, not on the level of what we saw from Oregon and Ohio State and Michigan to an extent as well, which is the really frustrating thing. And it's, again, why this team just needs one more year of maturity to just continue to grow together, because you add a couple more pieces to this. You add maybe a piece or two from the transfer portal as well. It's very clear it's all there on the offensive side of the ball, but the defense, it also really stepped up when it was needed. And we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at Rugia. Let's talk about something most men don't bring up, but absolutely should. Stress from work, money, life. It doesn't just switch off at night. And when it shows up at the worst possible time, Rugia Ready is designed to help you take back control. Rugia Ready is a next-generation prescription treatment created to support both the brain and the body so you can feel present, confident, and ready when the moment matters. The science behind Roebuck Ready stands out. 3 clinically proven ingredients in one formula designed for both mental and physical readiness. You connect with a board-certified doctor online, and everything ships discreetly to your door. It's easy to understand why over 150,000 men have already made the switch. If you've been thinking about taking the next step, now's the time. Head to rugiet.com/lockdowncollege. That's rugiet.com/lockdowncollege to get 15% off your order for a limited time. Roebuck Ready. Feel present, feel confident, feel ready. We've also got a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. NFL Sundays move fast, one big play, and suddenly everything feels different. That's what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place bets as the action unfolds, every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight moment. Live betting is best when the game starts to shift, a receiver gets hot, a defense tightens up, or the momentum flips after a turnover. FanDuel lets you jump into the moment. Live spreads and money lines adjust instantly. Player props update as guys heat up. You can bet next touchdown scores, drive results, totals, and more. It keeps you locked into every snap, every drive, every possibility. So if you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. FanDuel, the game moves fast, and so can you. So this was an interesting, I want to say, game for the defense where it was tremendous. It was awesome. I can't necessarily say I was overly impressed with either quarterback in this game. When Maddox Madsen was in, he was fine. I know he's been dealing with a toe injury, so that was certainly part of it. And obviously that's what kept him out for the second half as well. And in the second half, you did a really nice job of taking advantage of having a backup quarterback in the game who made a couple of really bad decisions. Like that first pick to Leroy Bryant. I don't know why you don't just throw that ball out of bounds, even at that point in time. Like, I get you pressing, but you don't need to press that much. And I don't want to say any of that to take any credit away from this defense, because like the number one guy I want to make sure we brought up here is Xe'ree Alexander has just been absolutely tremendous for the majority of the season. And even then, it's been somewhat overshadowed because of how good Xe'ree has been as a true freshman, and just the storyline around Jacob Manu as well and his eligibility and everything like that. And Xe'ree just tonight showed that he is absolutely a building block on this defense in 2026. And one thing that needs to be mentioned in that same department was KJR's Dave Mahler reported before the game that Devin Bryant didn't make the trip, and it looks like he's going to be in the transfer portal. And I feel like Xe'ree and his emergence this season, plus, everything else that we've talked about in terms of the linebacker position, is a big reason why.
Yeah, Xavier's being a young guy and multiple young players in that room next year that could emerge at either a starter or backup role. There just wasn't room for Devin. So, best of luck in his future. But I mean, Xe'ree also getting a shout out on special teams as well. Just quick, brief in there. It's like,
yeah, that was
really kind
that
of
was
do it
fun.
all. I was wondering, I'm like, is Kai Horton going to get replaced by X at quarterback for a couple snaps here? At some point, just because I think when we talked about him throughout the season, it was one of those, you don't really know where you could play him. And that's a good problem to have, where I think where we know how good this defense was under Ryan Walters in the regular season, but they never had the turnovers and never in this volume. I think that's the real takeaway here, pun intended, because when you look at what X's impact is, yeah, you got a sack, which you didn't really have a ton of this season from a number of guys. And then you get an interception. And then you get, just the playmaking ability time after time. That's what I was going to say, we're lacking on a consistent basis this season, where you had good defenders and a good overall defense, but at times it was kind of a leaky save. I think they were, 2 for 12 on third down at one point. So it wasn't just, hey, you're making big hits, but, you're kind of getting outshot here. I think Max Cudforth had 200 some odd yards passing, by the end of the game, and 140, 180 of that was in garbage time, I want to say. Like, you're not looking at those numbers and saying, ooh, like, you have a lot of yards and you just happen to get a few picks. It was, no, they happened to get some yards and you forced a bunch of picks and took advantage of some, like you said, untimely decisions, because, when you're facing backups that are also redshirt sophomores that haven't played a ton, that's what should happen, and that did tonight.
It wasn't even just that, because I like where you're going with that. It was just everything working in tandem, which we have is exactly what you're saying. We haven't seen that in a while, because it was the combination of the pass rush plus what was going on the back end throughout this game, which was a really nice thing to see, because you mentioned it, right? Like, I know Boise State's left tackle opted out of this game. They had a couple of guys that did opt out, which certainly makes life a little bit easier for Washington, who is treating this as a championship game. But in the same note, like you said, it's just something we haven't seen a whole lot of, especially along the front four, front five, whatever the pass rush looked like. And it was one of the things that I really enjoyed about Xe'ree's interception was it looked like the same exact play call that Ryan Walters dialed up that got a sack on Dante Moore a couple weeks ago against Oregon. And is that how you want to have, your pass rush hit home on corner blitzes, or not even that? It's just a sim pressure where I think there are only 4 guys coming. But those aren't necessarily the plays that you want to see the pass rush come from, but the fact that you can now, as you start to look forward, couple that with hopefully better playing from the defensive line. We look at this class that's coming in, plus assuming a few additions from the transfer portal in the same vein, everything is starting to come together in that light. Like, obviously Takario Davis is unable to play again tonight, and Dylan Robinson just continues to really impress and look like a future building block for this defense. And as we continue to see just kind of those guys stand out alongside of, what you needed this season from an Ontario Thompson and a Taitai Uyunglele and a Zach Durfee and Jacob Lane, it's all just a really exciting sign for, what is to come under Ryan Walters.
And what did Ryan Walters say often happens? He gets better in year 2. And it's hard to imagine going, they already improved, I think, 30 some odd, ranking spots from where they were last season under Steve Belichick.
Very least, yeah.
And to me, that's so kind of, in one part it's tantalizing and one part it's scary. Scary for opposing offenses, but just beautiful for Washington because you have so many young players as well. You're not just, like you mentioned, Takario Davis, this would have been his last game, but you have a freshman coming in who's going to be a starter probably for at least a year or 2 behind him in Dylan Robinson. That's why you want to play freshmen early on in the season and throughout the season. It's not just, hey, you know what, this senior is opting out of a bowl game or not able to play because of an injury, so we're going to have to kind of plug and play some freshmen. We'll just kind of hope that it works out. No, Dylan showed why he got some time early on in the season, and it's just one of those reasons that you look at it and think, Alex McLaughlin, Leroy Bryant, you look at Rahshawn Clark, that's second, right, round down. You can go down the list of guys in that secondary next season, and there's probably 4 or 5 more that are going to make a name that we're not even talking about right now. That's what makes this defense so promising next season, and why tonight was so important that you got a running start on it, because with everything potentially waiting in the wings of what you're going to add in the transfer portal, you still already have a really solid foundation to build off of. You're not leaning on the portal to make that happen. You're just looking for some supplemental pieces.
And one guy who I just want to make sure I mention, where he's not unfortunately going to be part of that because this was the last game of his college career, but has been one of the unsung heroes of this defense all year long, was Deshawn Lynch. This is a guy who, when you talking about the defensive line and the pass rush, he was someone who didn't necessarily have the numbers on the stat sheet in terms of sacks and pressures and all that. But whenever he needed to play, it always felt like he was in the middle of something, where he led all defensive linemen in the nation in pass breakups. And to see him get an interception today, just in that moment, where it was a poorly thrown ball on just a really weird play from Boise State. But hey, sometimes that's just what it takes, and you're in the right place at the right time, right? But to see Deshawn Lynch get to end his college career on a note like that is really nice, because all year we've talked about, where is this pressure going to come from off the edge? What's that going to look like from that position, especially after Russell Davis gets hurt and misses the season, and Isaiah Ward gets hurt and misses a decent amount of time. And so much was thrown at not just Zach Durfee and Jacob Lane, but we saw Devin Hyde step up and take a role. We saw Hayden Moore in there in a couple of different situations. And Deshawn, who missed the start of the season with an injury, to come back like that and just have that kind of impact just on this team as a whole, as a really nice edge setter in the run game. And, you talk about the improved defense. The run defense needs to absolutely be front and center in that discussion, where it jumped like 60 spots or something in terms of national yards per game allowed. There's so much to like about what this front seven brought, and I think he was such a big part of that, and just didn't necessarily get the recognition that I think he deserved because the sack numbers weren't there.
Which on some level is fair, because a lot of the edge defensive line is about production, and what do you look at? Sacks, tackles for loss, quarterback pressures, things like that. But it's about the overall impact and what he represents, where if you're kind of looking 2-3 years down the line, or let's even just say next season, just to make it easier. And when we were talking about transfer additions, Ryan Walters now points to this game and says, hey, this is what I need on a guy from every single game. Like that, I'm not saying you're going to get that every single game, but that type of impact where you're going and looking at guys in the portal saying, hey, we need you to be like this. We view you as this type of guy, not a guy that can, pop every 3 or 4 games, or 4 or 5 games, it felt like at times this season with the pass rush. Ryan Walters' scheme works. Now it's just a matter of finding the right personnel to match with it. Because again, like shout out Devin Hyde, like you mentioned, I have another freshman who played, I think, almost every game, if not every game this season. And that was somebody that, if you ask average Husky fans, even ones that follow recruiting, would Dezmen have played the entire season? He played 4 or 5 games maybe, but it wouldn't have been a guy that was a consistent contributor. Most of it coming on special teams, but just that's another small building block that we're looking at and saying, no matter what type of body it is, if the evaluation checks out, those guys are going to find a way to make an impact, and probably early. And those guys all did this season and tonight.
Yeah, and it's one of the things that Ryan Walters mentioned the other day during his press conference, where he said, my defense always takes a big jump from year 1 to year 2 because guys are more comfortable. They know their roles in the scheme a little bit better. And especially with a defense like this being as young as it is, that's a really exciting thought, because you look at, all the building blocks. We didn't say the name Rylan Dillard-Allen, who was such a big part of that. We hardly talked about Xe'ree Alexander, who played a whole lot tonight. We know that Jacob Manu is coming back and is going to be part of it. You mentioned Alex McLaughlin. All of the pieces on the back 7 are going to be there. And it is, coupling all these guys that are coming in 2026, the JD Hills and Derek Coleman Bruce's and T.I. Mukaisa's, with a couple of these hopefully experienced, high-end, productive pass rushers from the transfer portal, because you can build a really, really special defense if you can just go out and get 1 or 2 of those guys, which is a really exciting thought for the future. So, Lars, let's dive into everything that's ahead. And we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at Aura Frames. The holidays are officially here, which means gift hunting season is on. If you want something meaningful, personal, and guaranteed to get a reaction, Aura Frames is the gift that delivers every time. It's not just something you wrap, it's a way to share memories, because Aura isn't your average picture frame. You can preload the frame with photos before gifting it, so when they plug it in, the memories are already there. No apps to figure out, no setup headaches, just instant smiles. And I can confirm that. I've had some friends and some everydayers reach out to say that they've sent that to parents and grandparents for kids, pictures of pets, all that sort of stuff, which is really awesome to hear. You can add a personalized message right inside the frame so the gift feels thoughtful the moment it's opened. For a limited time, save on the perfect gift by visiting auraframes.com to get $35 off Aura's best-selling Carver Mat frames, named #1 by Wirecutter, by using promo code COLLEGE at checkout. That's auraframes.com, promo code COLLEGE. This deal is exclusive to listeners, and frames sell out fast, so order yours now to get it in time for the holidays. Support the show by mentioning us at checkout. Terms and conditions apply. All right, Lars, it's time to dive into the big picture here, because there have been rumors swirling for days and connections being made with Jedd Fisch. So the question that is on everybody's minds is, will he be here next season? And if I were to make a bet as of right now, personally, I would say yes. So things are absolutely, subject to change in the next 24 to 96 hours, let's call it. But as I continue to look at the situation, I think all of the pieces there add up. But this is one of those things where you look at this team and this game and how everything just went, leaving that for Michigan, it just feels like, just with what Michigan is, just being an absolute disaster at this point in time, just feels like a really bad decision. And again, things are subject to change there. But as I look at that, I feel like you can finally, take a game like this. And is it necessarily a win over the biggest opponent? No disrespect to Boise State. They were in the college football playoff last year, rightfully so. But I look at this game, and it was all about, as you and I talked about before the season, throughout the year, was getting to this point, getting to 9-10 wins. And the fact that you're able to do that is a really nice sign of what this program is moving forward. And I think that is something that should matter in this discussion.
It does. So the way that I view this, and I agree with you on a lot of levels. And the only reason that I'm just still I'm not on the fence. I still, if I really had to make a decision, I think he is at Washington. But would it absolutely surprise me if he's not? No, because the Michigan job means so much. It's a top brand, things like that. But it's also what we say about Washington, where you can do that exact same thing at Washington, and you don't have that cloud over your head of, hey, are we going to get impacted by this, by the NCAA and things like that? It's also why Michigan might want to target a guy like Fisch, who could bring an operation to Ann Arbor and have that NFL organizational type of structure where he doesn't come with that baggage. He comes with a lot of movement, in his record in terms of moving from job to job, but these are now destination jobs that we're talking about. I think tonight's game answers the question. If Washington came out flat and stayed flat, like, you talk about the first quarter, if we saw that carry out into the fourth quarter and this was a, 21-24 game and it just looked ugly, like maybe you pull it out, maybe you don't, then I would think, his bags are probably already packed. He's jets fueling up on the tarmac in Burbank, and he's flying to Ann Arbor tonight. That's not the sense that I got. And I think this might have been a game where if he was deciding still going into the game, it might have swayed him to come back because everything is there for him at Washington. The resources, I would imagine, contractually, we're not going to be an issue there. Sure, Michigan might afford him, may be able to pay him more, but I don't think that's what it would come down to. It's what can I do? What can I accomplish now, next season? And looking at everything he's got on the table, Washington clears Michigan. It's not even close.
So that's one of the interesting things with this, where you bring in the number 12 ranked recruiting class, according to 247 Sports. You have all of that. You're very clearly just starting to build everything that you want here. And it's one of those things where do you want to pick that up and move again? Where leaving Arizona at that time where, it wasn't necessarily expected for a while until, everything starts to happen over the course of that week leading up to the national championship with Kalen DeBoer, where it's, oh, wait, Alabama's what's coming open. Yeah, we didn't necessarily see that coming. That was kind of what put all of this into motion. And I would say that this is certainly a similar situation in that regard with what happened with Sherrone Moore and just how insane everything was with all of that. But this is one of those things where I certainly agree that if we saw a flat team throughout the night, that certainly would have been a symbol of something. I don't think things are done in any measure when it comes to what Michigan wants to do in that department. But I think that this was just something that Jedd can now take to Pat Chun and to this Washington athletic department and say, look, I have all of this right here. I need X, Y, and Z in terms of, NIL guarantees and assistant coach salary pools. And if you can give me this, absolutely. Because he keeps saying, yeah, I plan to be here. I plan to stick around. And people are going to do with that comment what they will. Like that's something that is going to get twisted every which way, no matter what, when you just go back and listen to how he's talked about this throughout the season. But I also just look at this and I want to go back to exactly what you said, because this is something that we're certainly going to talk more about in the days and weeks as this continues to carry on. But this is one of those things where when you look at what you have at Washington right now, it's something that we've said a lot over the last couple of months is there is a very clear building block for at least the next 2 seasons at every single position on the field. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about that. And I think that's the one thing that's really exciting to think about with this roster. And I'm not saying you can't build that at Michigan, because that would be a ridiculous thing for me to say. But at the same point, it's just kind of, this is what you know right now, and this is what you know you can achieve. And I feel like it's something you like to talk about. All of this at the end of the day for Jedd comes back to leveraging everything to try to get an NFL head coaching job one day. We all know that is what his end goal is. Probably with the Philadelphia Eagles, with his good buddy Howie Roseman. We'll see how that plays out. But I feel like that is what it's all about at the end of the day. And if he can stay in one place and continue to win in one place, I think that is really important for these NFL evaluators to be like, or decision makers to say, okay, yeah, we'll buy into you because you were able to do this at this place. And turning around Arizona the way he did was really, really impressive. And Washington is a job that doesn't get as much respect as it deserves on a national scale. And a lot of that is because of some recent dark ages, as recently as Jimmy Lake. And if you want to go back to the Ty Willingham era and everything like that, like, it's understandable why Washington has fallen off the map in terms of the social media era and why people don't view it that way. And something I've talked about before, I don't think that Chris Peterson's plan to market Washington did it any favors as well in that department. But this is one of those things where everything that he wants to achieve, he can at Washington. And I don't think that this game shows that, but I think this season does. And it's one of those things that we've talked about after every single loss. It is on him to find a way to get everything to the next level. It is on him to figure out how to continue to get the most out of Demond Williams and his talent and his offense and get over these slow starts and get over the hump of beating these big time ranked opponents. That is on him to figure out. And all of that is achievable here at Washington. We saw it 2 years ago. It's all possible.
Yeah, no, I mean, I know we both know this. Like, Jedd Fisch is well aware of what's in front of him in Washington. I think it's just the question kind of that came up with Kalen, where is this good enough for me? Do I take this opening because it might not come open for however many years? I mean, the only reason the job went to Sherrone Moore is because Jim Harbaugh had to exit stage left. And otherwise, without the whole Connor Stallions thing, that job doesn't even come open. There's no way. I mean,
I think he was off to the NFL either way.
But I think it would have been a different type of transition. Maybe Jedd gets a call, maybe he doesn't. But, it's one of those, if you got a shot, take it. But I think why not do what Kenny Dillingham is doing at Arizona State? Make this your home. Call it, Seattle is a major market. You have this isn't, Norman, Oklahoma, no shot there. You're not talking about where it's, you got to kind of negotiate for some things. It's a matter of how much and how quickly can you capitalize on it. And we went from a roster of 40 guys after Kalen left to now 9 wins and 2 years later. And I think that is a massive statement. But what's ironic, and I put this out on Twitter, and I just want to clarify this. It had Jedd Fisch and Washington lost this game. It's crazy to realize that Jedd and Jimmy Lake would have had the same record percentage. Now, obviously, Jedd had 13 more games to his credit than as Jimmy Lake did. That was kind of crazy. Where if you lose this game, that's now you're in that 500 ballpark. Whereas Kalen kind of set the kind of expectations through the roof. And I think Jedd is the right guy to, wait it out, weigh all his options. But Jedd's a smart guy. He knew what Washington was when he was at Arizona. I think this is what's going to end up swaying him, and I agree with you, to stay at Washington. It's not going to be easy for Pat Chung, and you're going to have to pony up some things. But Jedd is the right guy to do it because you've already seen the ROI in year 2.
I want to touch on one thing you just said. I don't think as of this moment with that job, it's convincing Jedd to stay at Washington. I'll be very clear about that. I think it's just continuing to just build what's here, because with Michigan, there are other candidates that seem to be far ahead of him. Kalen DeBoer being one of them. So we'll see how several things work out in that department. The name I'm really interested in that department as well is Kyle Whittingham, who obviously stepped down at Utah very recently. And I said he was going to pursue other coaching opportunities. I feel like that would be a very interesting fit in terms of how he's always just had his identity through the defense and what Michigan's defense has been for so long. So that's something I wouldn't rule out at any point in time either. But as I just continue to look at what the future is at Washington, again, everything that has just come about in the last couple of weeks, not even in terms of job searches, but in terms of what we've seen, even let's just go back to the beginning of November, because we saw a real low to start that month. But then we saw Washington really do pick it up and beat the inferior opponents, do what they were supposed to do there. And then you get to the Oregon game and you take away one play. Obviously you can't. And obviously that's a very big play, but you take away one play, all of a sudden you have the ball and a shot to win that game. Like, that is how close things are to getting to that next level under Jedd here at Washington. I do think he realizes that. And I think that that's just kind of become a really big part of this. And the more that I just look at what this future can be, because you listen to Matt Doherty on the show, all our everydayers listen to Matt Doherty on the show, talk about what the plan is and what can be, what this 2026 class brings to the table. Elite talent all over the field. That guy and that coaching staff just showed that you can get that at Washington. People didn't think that you could get up to number 12 in the recruiting rankings here at UW. That's just something that just feels unheard of when you just look at social media and their responses to things like that. And it's very clear that all of that is possible here. And I think this coaching staff as a whole, and Jedd included, realizes that. And it's just one of those things where a lot of the connections, and again, all of this is subject to change, but a lot of the connection to Jedd Fisch at Michigan is, yeah, he coached there. Yeah, he had success there. You've listened to our buddy Jake Butt talk about that on this very show as well. It's all of that makes sense, but I do not think that he is priority number one there at this point in time either. And with all of these other factors, I think that it just will make Washington very, very enticing for him as well.
It's a matter of, what did Will Connor say? Don't turn your back on Washington. Put Washington on your back. And I know it's a basketball reference there, but it's the same thing with Jedd, where he might not be from the state, have a bunch of ties, but make it your state. Own the state like you did in recruiting. And by the way, you mentioned they finished 12th. Michigan finished 11th, so you're not talking about that much of a gap there. You're basically already on par with Michigan already. You beat Michigan and Sherrone Moore at Husky Stadium in year 1. Run it back a couple of years from now. Like, that to me, I think, and I'll end with this, because the note that I got was big things ahead. Problem was, didn't say what, but the insinuation I think is going to be at Washington. And so for me, everything with Damon, Adam Muhammad, whether or not Denzel comes back, you have enough for a receiver. You just go.
I still think he's going to the draft. I
agree. I agree with that. I just want to get that on record there. But even without or with Denzel, you're set at receiver. Tight end is good. Line is good. Defensive line. That's where you got to improve the most. And I think Jedd knows that. But if you have to improve one or two positions on defense, and with Ryan Walters is going to now show guys in the transfer portal, everything is there for Washington to have a 10-win season next year.
Sure. No, that is absolutely the case when you look at the schedule and you look at just everything that this program program is able to achieve with what the talent coming back is and what you can also bring in. And that's all a really exciting thought. And we're going to have so much more of that coming at you right here on Locked On Huskies. So wherever you get this podcast, please make sure to subscribe. And Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. And once again, wherever you get this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, make sure to subscribe. Click that little bell so you notice when we post a new show. Plus, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're on audio only, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Monday.